melt this when I ocean wave.
Today on Nova Legends podcast, I had the great Matt Hatfield, Virginia Preps, and now he has his own podcast with Ed Young, formerly ESPN, but now on Virginia Beach Sportsplex YouTube channel. Obviously, check those guys out. They do an amazing job. Matt, good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, Julian, my pleasure. Good to be chatting with you again as we're revved up with some high school football, and then basketball's right around the corner.
Yeah, that's it. This is the change of season. This is the things that me and you love. The hope of a brand new season. I did mention your radio show. How do consumers of high school sports, and you guys do a lot of college sports too, pro sports, are they going to YouTube now and podcasts, or ESPN? Is it a bigger audience there? Where are the consumers of sports now?
Without question, I think, and it's actually something I told one of my radio bosses during the pandemic, is that, radio's not going away or dying. I don't want people to get that misconception or there's this hatred for it but all kinds of ways that you get your news and information, whether it be through television, radio, print, newspapers, are all having to adapt, even the internet, because social media is such a big deal now and people want it instant. They want instant, and podcasting, I think, is certainly something that's growing and exploding. I know a lot of people that I used to listen to on radio, for example, like a Tony Kornheiser, for example, or a Mike Francesa, that got their start either in the print industry through radio. Francesa was with Mike and the Mad Dog. People watch, obviously, Kornheiser with Michael Wilbon on ESPN's PTI, pardon the interruption. And he was with the Washington Post for many, many years. And that's, really what began his career. They've turned to podcasting, and they're still generating a large audience that tune in to them on a regular basis. So for us, it's a new venture we're really excited for, looking forward to. We're starting to build up an audience that was with us from the radio side of things, that certainly follow what I do on social media, that know my work. Coach Young from the basketball side, winning 500 plus games at Nansman River. And I think a lot of it is just making it an enjoyable listen for people, much like your podcast and what you do, and having guests on and hitting the sports scene. And Coach Young and I have a natural chemistry that works well together. He can jab me, I can jab him, push each other's buttons a little bit, but have some fun doing so in a good-natured way where we highlight the teams and the players and the coaches, because at the end of the day, it's not about us, it's about them.
Yeah. Well, you guys give a lot of exposure to athletes, and we owe you a measure of debt for doing that. So hopefully you guys continue success, and I look forward every week. I look forward to listen in. I did not hear you yesterday. Did you pick Colorado to beat Texas TCU yesterday?
I did. We didn't make a pick on that game. We did talk about, one of our guests was Damon Sordelette, who writes for the Roanoke Times, to talk about Virginia Tech and Old Dominion, which ended up being a Hokies win. They covered the spread. The Monarchs obviously beat them twice in Norfolk. It's sort of become a little in-state rivalry type of game now. It's not quite the level of Tech UVA, but both programs trying to make some progress. But we did talk about it. One of my things I threw at Damien was, and I felt this going in, that the most fascinating thing in college football was Deion Sanders in Colorado. Whether you like him, love him, hate him, whatever your feelings are, he's polarizing, and it's captivated and captured the nation's attention. And now it'll be even more so. High noon, Nebraska. It's just, it's almost like I heard this from someone today earlier, Julian, that Oregon kids want to go play for Oregon because of all these flashy different uniform colors and that offense Chip Kelly ran. Well, you watch what Deion Sanders did with, I can't ever remember a game, and you've watched football for many years, pro, college, high school, and obviously Shedeur Sanders, his son, had a monster game. Travis Hunter, two-way player. People are talking about him like Charles Woodson, although he played more snaps and contributed in both sides in a way than Woodson did. Woodson was a Heisman winner and a shutdown corner, Hall of Famer in the NFL. And it was a five-star recruit, was Hunter. So I think people have to pay attention to the talent. They had 4 different 100-yard receivers. I can't ever remember a game, the greatest show on turf with Kurt Warner and the Rams, high school football games I've covered with explosive offenses, college teams like Alabama. I can't ever remember a game where a team had 4 different 100-yard receivers in the same game. That's just incredible.
Yeah. I think it's one of the most incredible coaching debuts in college football history, because I just thought it'd take him a year or two. And, Jackson State, what he did there was incredible. But can you duplicate that on a 1AA scale? And, I think he's already proven he'll be able to. Obviously, the game is not over. He's got a lot to do, but he's well on his way to having Fantastic season. You mentioned in-state rivalries. Next week is a big one in Charlottesville. I'll be there. I'm not sure if you're going to be there. Who are you picking, James Madison or UVA?
It's wild that James Madison is like a 6-point favorite in that game on the road at an ACC school, which shows you how far they have come. In some respects, people will say this is how far UVA has fallen, but let's be perfectly honest here. UVA has gone through an awful lot in the last year. We've all had our thoughts and prayers with Tony Elliott and his program with what they've had to deal with off the field, and just the fact they were on the field, like he sort of spoke about after the Tennessee game, is a step in the right direction and an accomplishment in itself. I feel like UVA is still in a transition period, and I feel like JMU is a little more stable right now. I think it's going to be a close game. I don't think it's a blowout, but I think JMU might take it by a field goal. So I'm going to hedge there and say I like the Dukes to pull it out, but the line might be a little high there. And Cavaliers at home getting that many points, for those that are in the entertainment business of things, they might say that the Cavs can take this one. So I think it's going to be like a 20-17, 24-21 type of game. I'm going to give the slight nod to the Dukes, which is hard to believe I'm saying that, whereas 10, 15 years ago, people would have laughed at me or snickered at that thought.
I do think this year that UVA has an advantage because they're underdog. I think
True.
Madison has a target on their back coming into Charlottesville. UVA has a lot to prove. So I actually think UVA is going to overachieve. I don't play college football, but if I did, I would definitely take the 6 points. And I think UVA is going to play well. But I think you're right. It's going to be a close game. Well, let's go to high school football. I mean, the season's off to an incredible start. We get all these cross interstate rivalries, matchups already. Highland Springs went down to Florida. Wise and Maryland hosted Maury from Norfolk your way and got their butts kicked. I knew that Stonebridge went up to Martinsburg and got their butts kicked by a great Martinsburg, West Virginia team that had lost to Highland Springs last year. So what are your thoughts on some of the early season matchups? It's been thrilling to watch.
I think the Madison Stonebridge game was a wild finish, just to have that, kickoff where you basically, I mean, it's a trick play, razzle dazzle to win it. I think Stonebridge was still smarting and stung from that loss. Highland Springs has won 2 games by 6 points or less here, actually both by 6 points, beating Miramar, Lauren Johnson's alma mater down in Florida. And then they had that thrilling of a game with Manchester, 41-35. Freedom had a heck of a game with Verina. It's funny, we were talking about on our podcast about how Verina had a shutout against Indian River in Chesapeake down in the 7-5-7. Now they play the most explosive offense. They get down 27-0. It looked like donuts were coming Freedom's way. And then Verina came storming back and made it a game. So I think that's a step. I think there's some teams like Manchester and Verina that had, I guess you could say, positive signs and close losses, encouraging losses, which you don't always think of early in the season. The private schools have flexed their muscles in different areas. The Richmond area, there's some teams like Benedictine that went down to Tidewater, beat Western Branch, Collegiate, handled Goochland. We're seeing some of these private schools. St. Christopher's beat Lafayette in Tidewater by a couple points. And then you're seeing the out-of-state opponents. Some of the Northern Virginia teams have not fared as well. Quince Orchard beat South County rather convincingly, although South County took care of business against Robinson in the first week. You also see coming up, Quince Orchard's going to play Stonebridge. So the Bulldogs could be looking at like a 1-4 type of record. Hard to believe after 4 or 5 games. And I think you're seeing some new teams emerge, but a lot of your stalwarts still solidifying themselves. The Highland Springses, the Maurys, the Phoebuses. Phoebus just beat Oscar Smith, defensively rock solid 16-2. And there's still this front end of the schedule has been littered with some great games, but it also makes me wonder, Julian, we could get some rematches of those games, like in the smaller division, Class 2. Riverheads played Central Woodstock. It was like an 8-7 game. Central Woodstock won that. They're in the same region now, so that could be a rematch in the region championship. Highland Springs and Manchester, I mentioned, they're in the same region. They could see each other again on Thanksgiving weekend in 6A. So you don't want to draw too much from an early season game. Those two teams that play in a classic or a much anticipated game could run into each other again. And a lot can change between now and November on the road to December and trying to get the state championship, because injuries can pop up, different position units can step up. So there's a little bit that I've taken away here, but the main thing is I think you still see a lot of your traditional powers at the top, and that's not going to change, I don't think, with the coaching staffs and some of these runs that teams that have been on these championship pursuits for years, the Riverheads, the Highland Springs, you fill in the blank, Dinwiddie, those teams, Phoebus, you're used to them, and I think they're going to still be there come December and late playoff time.
Yeah. Well, so Highland Springs went to Marymount in Florida, and they came back.
Mhm.
Was the closeness of the game against Manchester? Do you think that was due to the travel and maybe the short comeback, or do you think Manchester is on the same level as Highland Springs?
Well, I will say this, and I heard this even from Mike Lombardi, who used to work in the NFL front offices and as a GM, and he does cover the Pro Football League. And I think it's true to high school and college, Julian. I think the weather this time of the year is a factor, more so in late August, early September than it is come December, January when you get into colder times, because your conditioning matters. And I've seen some teams, I won't call out teams about, oh, there's team's conditioning's bad, this team's better. But fatigue is a real thing. And you'll see some leads that have dwindled in some of these games. We just touched on with the Freedom game, for example. So I think that's a real thing, and depth is a real deal. If you don't have seconds at a certain spot where a team can scratch that and expose it, it matters. So I feel like that's why we're seeing some things. As far as the Highland Springs margin, Manchester's really good. I mean, they brought back a lot of starters. Tom Hall thinks this team could be close to as good as his record-setting team that won the state championship about 4 or 5 years ago. Now, whether they get there or not, time will tell. But the Springers also graduated defensively from last season's team. 8 players that were all-state selections. 8. 6 of those players were first-team all-state performers. So it's easy to say we're Highland Springs, we're just going to fill those gaps. But those are senior players. They're not transfer coming here. You'll learn terminology if you have transfers and things of that nature. That takes some time to get acclimated to Coach Lauren Johnson and his longtime, really successful defensive coordinator, Devon Simmons' system and scheme. So I don't think when you play competition of that ilk, when you play Miramar and you play Manchester, and then you've got Maury coming up, you're not going to pitch a shutout. It's not that simple. You snap your fingers and say, oh, yeah, let this junior that come in. It was your backup last year. He's just going to take your spot and do it right away. It doesn't work that way. So I think in some cases, the defenses takes a little longer to get adjusted. I think that may have been the case for Freedom in the second half of its game with Verina. And I think it goes down to a lot of different levels where we're seeing teams, not just at the Class 6, Class 5, even your smaller division schools, your Class 2s and your Class 1s, they're hurting for numbers. And if you only have about 20, 25 players that you can use at the varsity level, that can matter if your top tailback goes out or your best linebacker or tackler gets dinged up.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned private schools earlier, and we have a huge matchup in the DC area on Friday. I believe it's Friday. It's number 3 rated in the DC area. Number 1 rated, I believe, in Virginia Preps, Freedom, in the state returning state champions, is playing DeMatha. Now, I think DeMatha was thought of as maybe they'd be down this year. They were rated number 6 going into the Washington Post preseason. They had lost Tavani Mazel, who went back to Western in Florida, their star running back. So I don't think people knew what to expect. They had a big win on the road in Ohio, I believe, the opening week. This is a big matchup. Who are you picking in the Freedom DeMatha matchup?
I would have said for sure Freedom about a week and a half ago, but I'm having some pause of what happened against Verina, where you're up 27-0 in the second quarter, and Verina's offense, which was not electric for the entire game against Indian River, goes out. And I know they got an interception, a pick 6. Some of that was done defensively. But that's the other thing. When you have a couple of turnovers and there's some penalties, I think Freedom had 13 flags in that game, and you're playing DeMatha. I watched them dismantle Oscar Smith a few years back in Chesapeake, and that's when they had Chase Young, who now plays for the Washington Commanders, and he's a Sunday player. But you have those type of miscues or missteps, it's hard to recover from that. So I think Freedom can still pull this out, but I don't think it's going to be. I would have probably given it about a 60 to 65% now. I think it's probably closer to 50 to 55%. This is really a toss-up game here, Julian. I do think the positive for Daryl Overton and his staff coming out of that game is now the antenna's up. Verona got their attention. They thought this might just be a cakewalk again until, maybe we see Highland Springs in the state semis. We're just going to breeze through Region 6B. If we see Battlefield, we see Gainesville, if we see whoever, we'll just do what we did last year. And that was last year. And these guys have to set that mark, even though a lot of those players are back. Your Jeff Overton's at running back, who's Reggie Bush-like. Your Kristen Evans at quarterback. Your E.J. Reed, who was really the star of the game the last time out for them in that win against Verona with what he did both sides of the ball, especially on defense. Your Cam Courtney's, your recruitable, your prospects for the next level. They have to go prove it against a team that's not going to be afraid of you and has in their opinion, as many, if not more, and better prospects that they feel like we're coming in and we should win this game. So this is a real test, but I think Freedom needs this. Win, lose, or draw, you need that competition and motivation to keep the focus and get you ready for what's ahead the rest of the way and on your quest to try and repeat as state champs.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge game, and I agree that DeMatha is not going to be afraid of Freedom. And Freedom's got everything to prove. They're going to want to love to beat DeMatha because everyone says DeMatha's
chip on her shoulder.
Yeah, exactly.
Chip on her shoulder.
It's just going to be a great game. But some may say the game of the week next week is going to be down. I believe it's in Maury, where Highland Springs travels to Maury for a repeat of last year's Class 5 final.
Yeah, can I clone myself and be at two places at once? Is that possible, Julian? Can we do that? Can I clone myself and be at this game and that game? I'd love to do that.
Hopefully NFHS is working that day.
Yeah, and where I can watch the replay of that. I tried to watch some of the replay of the Wise game, although I'm not gonna. I love the NFHS. Do some calls, some championships with them, so I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying. But it might have been my internet connection. I kept freezing on me as I was trying to watch some of the replay as I prepared to preview and break down that Maury and Highland Springs game coming up. And I've seen both teams live. Maury a lot in the summertime. I saw Highland Springs in their scrimmage against Thomas Dale, which was a really good morning scrimmage back in August. And I feel like this is a total toss-up game. You never doubt or go against or say Lauren Johnson and his springers can't win something, because I think Lauren Johnson is as good a leader of men as any coach in the Commonwealth. Anybody. I think he's cut out to be a college coach one day. He's got one son at Virginia Tech and Braylon Johnson. He played at Virginia Tech, by the way. His other son, Peanut, they call him the linebacker. Brennan Johnson is as tough as a linebacker as there is. And there's some great linebackers in the state, as you know, with Fairfax getting Chris Jones, kind of fills the shoes of Tony Rojas, who's at Penn State now. Jones is committed to Georgia. You got Chris Cole at Salem, who's got his decision coming up, and the Bulldogs, reigning two-time national champs, trying to get him. But Brennan Johnson's the real deal at linebacker. I do think as you look at this game, kind of handicapping it, and Maury's well coached. Doreen McCain's another guy. It's one of the sharpest, most innovative offensive minds in the entire state. I think he's been hearing now for years, yeah, you got a state championship in 2019 at Hampton University over Stonebridge, but you haven't beaten Highland Springs. And nobody from the 757 has beaten Highland Springs in this run. Not Norview when he was an assistant, not Indian River, not Nansman River, nobody. So Maury, the opportunity is there for you to do something that hasn't happened for a team from Tidewater. It's in your backyard. This is your chance. You lost 2 state championships. One was the ultimate heartbreaker 2 years ago when Jacob Thomas found Zeke Wimbush at the end of the game. So Maury, playing wise, it was 14-all at the half. They outscored him 20-0 in the second half. Hard to believe I'm actually saying this. Maury might have a couple of more seasoned dudes, players, big-time playmakers than Highland Springs. And that never gets ever said. But with Highland Springs losing so much on that defense, Julian, that defensive line, they graduated Frank Coleman and Miles Green, who's now at UVA. If the Maury offensive line can control the line of scrimmage enough for the running game to get going, that could be the real difference here, because on the outside, they got some wide receivers with LeBron Bond, Josh Powell. Then you got Devontae Floyd, who's going to Duke, all-state defensive back 2 years in a row, also plays wide receiver. Fred J.R. Johnson, a South Carolina commit. They have the weapons. This is going to be a classic down-to-the-wire game, and I give a 51.1% edge to Maury. To Highland Springs is, 48.9. I think it's going to be a toss-up game, but I think it's Maury's time to finally conquer that demon and slay that dragon, potentially. Plus, Highland Springs is coming off 2 hard-fought games. Maybe they don't get as many breaks or pull out a 6.1 this time. Maybe they could be on the other end of that.
Yeah, and Maury's win against Wise, at Wise, may be the most impressive win we've seen yet. To go on the road to PG County and play against a program like that was very impressive. The left-hand quarterback, what's the quarterback's name for Maury?
For the Commodores, well, they have 2 quarterbacks. They have a Torrey Newkirk, who was the one that directed into the off-season championship 7-on-7 league, 7-on-7 passing tournament at Old Dominion. And they had their quarterback that got hurt last year as a backup is sort of like their gadget guy, and Kendall Daniels, who's one of the top free safeties in the country, class of 2025. So McCain's got multiple options, and both of these coaches will empty out some tricks. So if you think you'll just see one the whole game, I'm not totally sure of that. Now, Highland Springs has a really fine quarterback on their side with Christian Martin, who's committed to Maryland, and last year had like a 30-1 touchdown to interception ratio. So he's pretty flawless, but they have 2 really good options there. And at running back, they have multiple options. So I think with Maury, you can't key in on one guy. The Maury defense says, all right, you might not be able to key on one back or receiver for Highland Springs, but if we get enough of a pass rush or take away Martin's scramble ability, his, escape the pocket, that could make them less dynamic or multi-dimensional, multifaceted. So I think Maury might have a little more versatility, not a lot, a little more. And at home, it just feels like it could be their time, and there's not as many holes to fill. Whereas Maury defense, looking at their all-state guys, Julian, I think they had 4 all-state performers, first, second team last year. Only graduated 1 in Kelvin KT Say, who's now at Delaware. So again, just a little bit more experienced in some key positions.
Yeah, which I'm sure surprises people. Well, let's go to Class 6. We mentioned Freedom. Freedom last year beat Madison in the state final. I went to both Madison games this year. Love the way they execute. They got a brand new quarterback, but same result. Madison looks super at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, how good of a coach is Justin Counts right now? I mean, he has really, to graduate the last 2 years, I think it was like 28, 29 seniors, like 32, 33 this past year, and to not really skip a beat and do what they did. And matter of fact, one of their top wide receivers, and Sonny Endicott, transferred out to Colorado in the offseason. A lot of people don't know that. So they're doing this with, they have a lot of new faces, but I think he's been really, really sharp at getting his skill players. And defensively, they have a system. They're disciplined. They don't beat themselves. Westfield's a really good team out of the Concord, and we know what they've done for years. Centerville's been right there too. And it feels like Madison is taking that next step. And they got that sibling combination. A lot of your schools that have success, and I'm sure you've seen this in basketball too, you'll have a player, and it's the younger brother or older brother who wants to, his older brother was the mentor, but younger brother wants to go be that guy who's as good. I mean, you've had Dominic and Darren nicely at Madison right now. You have Cale Yates, whose older brother's Cord and Rye were standouts. Quarterback one's a tight end in the Ivy League at Yale. So you have that little lineage that is, I think, helped their program. We've seen it in other successful programs in Northern Virginia and throughout the state. And I think that's a big help that they've got. Part of a winning tradition was lay that foundation, and now they're continuing it and extending it with some of these new faces stepping in. And you're right, offensively, I was more impressed with the Lake Braddock win than the Stonebridge win. You know why? Reason why I was more impressed. What do you think?
It's funny. Lake Braddock was very impressive the way they moved the ball, but I felt like they really couldn't threaten Madison. I felt like Stonebridge was so talented in so many different positions, and I don't know. I give up.
Well, you make a good point, but here's why. So just to that point, last year they lost those first 3 games all within a touchdown to Stonebridge, to Lake Braddock, to Yorktown. But as we've talked about with some of these great teams, it's easy to have a letdown or take your foot off the gas, not have the focus. So they win that thrilling game with the kickoff return against Stonebridge. They're toasted to town. You play Lake Braddock, who's got a big offensive lineman, UVA commit up front. They're known for their passing game, and they shut them down and win 31-7. They didn't have a let up. So I feel like they're locked in now, and they're the kids that are jumping into new positions to go with some of their, household returnees, if you will, the Nicely brothers. You have Yates at quarterback. I feel like they're getting the message that, okay, we just got the Stonebridge win. It's something you don't have that letdown. And I thought that was as impressive because I thought the game might be a little bit closer, something like 24-14, 20-13, 21-10. And it was more decisive. And I think that's going to bode well for Madison now, because even as you've watched them in the last couple of years, they've won some games to get into the state championship that have been kind of close rock fights.
Yeah.
And I think now they might be a little bit more explosive than have to win a rock fight, game in the 20s or below.
Yeah, they had a fumble going into the end zone. It would have been 17-0 in the first quarter. And I thought the officials called way too many penalties. And I really broke up kind of the continuity of the game. But I did think it's probably worked to their favor. They're able to keep the game as close. Came out at halftime. I think it was 10-7 and just imposed their will. I'm not sure if he caught it, but maybe one of the biggest upsets of the early season was West Potomac, who used to be a great football power. I believe they beat Centerville on Friday. I don't know if you caught this, but people that saw the score, we didn't know whether to believe it, whether it was a typo or not. But if so, that had to be a huge upset.
Yeah, Centerville beat Alexandria City, formerly TC Williams, 28-3 in its opener. but I was not as high on Centerville this year as I was the last 2 years.
Okay.
And I feel like Coach John Shields has a lot of underclassmen. He had a couple of key players transfer out in the offseason. Of course, obviously, his stud running back, Isaiah Ragland's now at Villanova. So I was a little, I wouldn't say totally surprised, maybe so much impressed that they beat Alexandria 20-3. I felt like they could be vulnerable in the early first month of this season. And it is a sign that West Potomac might be ready to compete with some of the better teams around. Now, can they just go in and show some consistency is going to be a key here. But that one wasn't as stunning to me. I was surprised by the Madison, the way they won the game against Stonebridge. And there have been a couple other games that have kind of caught my eye, got my attention up throughout Nova and beyond here in the state. I think Battlefield's been great. I was more surprised by, to be honest with you, the decisive form in which Westfield blasted Patriot 35-7, because I thought Patriot was one of the last couple of teams that missed my top 10. So was Westfield. I thought that was a toss-up game. And Westfield said is no toss-up. We're winning by 4 scores.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Matthew, we talked about Manchester, obviously Highland Springs, Freedom, Madison. Who else is a threat in Division 6?
I think you have to look at Haymarket at Battlefield. They beat CD Hilton 62-6. They beat Potomac 56-14. Braden Boggs is a really dynamic playmaker. He's played quarterback. He's played wide receiver for them. Greg Hatfield's done a great job. No relation, by the way, although we can call him my cousin if he keeps winning. I don't have a problem with that, Greg. Good job for you and the Bobcats. But there are some questions. Had they played a tough schedule? Had they seen anybody? And last year they got knocked off in the first round of the playoffs unexpectedly to Colonial Forge, who's not your typical number 7 seed, who's been around the block and can be a factor. And by the way, they could be a dark horse there out of 6B. John Brown's got a really good team. They did a nice job against Woodbridge in their first game, and they're continuing to improve here, 48-13 over Alexandria City. So they might be a little bit more explosive than they've been in the last couple of years. And it feels like defensively they've got some parts that will help them out a great deal. I think in Region 6A, Oscar Smith and Western Branch are going through some growing pains right now in Tidewater. So it does feel like you might have that Richmond region final, whether it's Highland Springs, Thomas Dale, Highland Springs, Manchester. I guess Manchester, Thomas Dale could also be a possibility. And 6C, 6D, I would not rule out South County. I know people look at that score with Quince Orchard and say, what's wrong with them? 33-0, but they were really good that first game. I feel like Jordan Dennis at quarterback, he's really accomplished a whole lot. They have skilled position players. They have a really seasoned defense that I think will be impressive as we move along. But that 39-0 shutout the week before against Robinson is more of the team that I expect. And Westfield, I mentioned about the brothers, Taylor Morin's little brother, Connor Morin, he's a player to watch out for. And Jenks at quarterback, Matthew Jenks, Connor Morin, that's a combination to watch out for. So I think they're a team that if Madison is going to have a challenger in 6D, you point to Westfield because Kyle Simmons has been around the block before, knows what he's doing, and he's won a few state championships. So they're a team that could be back on its way up as far as contending and being a top 10 team and a team that plays on Thanksgiving weekend for a region championship.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Division 5, Class 5. Now, it seems like Hampton Roads has been dominant in 3, 4, and 5 over the last several years, and we've already talked about Maury. Maury's got to be a strong favorite now that Highland Springs has moved up to Class 6. So, who else are we looking at in Class 5?
Well, it's the Tidewater division right now, and I feel like I'm going to be called the biased 757 lover after this week because with Stonebridge's latest loss at 0-2, it's hard to justify them staying in the top 3 or 4, even 5, because you have obviously Maury, who looks like head and shoulders the team to beat right now until proven otherwise. You have Green Run, who's now won 25, 26 consecutive Beach District games by 35, 36 points per game, and they have another explosive offense, very lethal passing game led by Kassan Farrar, the Menchfield transfer. Keelan Brody Adams is one of the state's very best receivers committed to Virginia Tech, and they have receiver depth, they have speed, they have athleticism all across the ball, and they've got a couple of running backs emerging. Defense could be a question mark to a degree, but they have a really good secondary with a lot of playmakers, and I think they're not going to have any challenges defensively until maybe the state level round if they see a Maury or a Warwick. Warwick's a team out of Newport News that won the Region 4A championship last year, if you recall. Ran into Dinwiddie, got hammered by Dinwiddie in the state semis, but Corey Hairston's got a really fine program. Messiah DeLome is one of the best juniors in America. Michigan's recruiting him hard, and he's got a boatload of offers. And Eduardo Rios is an experienced quarterback. They have a lot of playmakers on defense that have returned. Kings Fork out of Suffolk got a big matchup with Western Branch coming up.
Are they 5? Is Kings Fork 5 now?
Fork moved up to 5 like Warwick, yeah.
Okay.
They have an excellent running back in Javon Ford to carry the way for them on offense. Still getting the passing game, at a level where they can compete with the Maurys and the Green Runs of the world. But Anthony Joffron's done a nice job with that program, and if they can eliminate some of the mistakes, the penalties, they have athletes on defense, and they have guys that will fly around and hit you and show some quickness and some aggressiveness. So those four teams right off the bat could be your four best teams in the state in Class 5. But I'm gonna caution you two teams to watch out for, Julian, besides Stonebridge, who everybody is kind of pretty much put in the state championship game. It doesn't matter they have 4 or 5 losses. Mickey Thompson, has been there like 13 times the last 16 years, and he'll get it figured out and get it right. But there are two teams that could be in their way, depending on whatever seed Stonebridge is and if Stonebridge has to go on the road. One of them at a 5C is Patrick Henry Roanoke.
I was going to ask.
Linebacker committed. Yeah, linebacker committed to Notre Dame and Bodie Cahoon. Chuck Webb on offense is putting up mega numbers already. Joey Beasley at quarterback is a seasoned guy who can throw the ball, make every throw, and they're good. And they have a lot of guys that are emerging. And then in 5D, they've won a couple of games here by 27-13, I think, type of scores. And they beat John Champ the first week. Briar Woods, Mike Burnett, he's taken a couple of different programs to state championship games before when he was at Broad Run and when he was at Tuscarora. And Brady Carmichael is one of the top flight quarterbacks in the state. Colin Capistrant catching the ball from him. They have started to make that step up, I think, to where they're thinking about playing for a region title and they want to be in the way of Stonebridge in that Region 5D. They just beat Independence rather convincingly, in fact. And in that game, Carmichael showed the ability to throw and run a little bit. So they're a team to watch out for. I think they're going to steadily move up in his top 10. And Briar Woods, Coach Burnett, you felt after a couple of years he would be right there lurking as a contender because all he does is win, 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 no matter what. As the song says, he finds a way to win.
Is Dinwiddie Class 5 this year, the Class 4 champion?
Dinwiddie's Class 4. They're still in Class 4.
Okay. Well, I just want to.
But Phoebus moved up to Class 4 from Class 3. So Phoebus and Dinwiddie could have a collision course come December.
Okay. Well, I do want to do a shout out to Riverside High School. They were 2-9 last year. Won the first 2 games. They have an amazing new cheerleader on the JV team, my daughter. Look out for we transferred out to Riverside. So that's my sleeper pick. Hopefully we can keep it up. 2 overtime wins so far. So let's go to Class 4. Last year it was Dinwiddie beating a Kettle Run in the final. As you mentioned, Phoebus, who had a strong argument as being the best team in the state, along with Freedom and along with Highland Springs last year. They're now 4. So what do you see in Class 4?
Well, real quick sidebar on Riverside. I was calling a ESPN Plus women's soccer matchup with Old Dominion and Women Mary on Sunday night, and a couple of players from their Leesburg, and one of them from Riverside as well. So they're getting the talent on the girls' soccer side of things from up there in Northern Virginia, including Riverside being one of those schools. I think Stonebridge and Independence had a couple of players as well. In Class 4, it feels like Phoebus and Dinwood are the best teams. Phoebus beat Oscar Smith. And it felt like it was worse than the 16-2 score on Friday night. And their defense, Julian, and this might make some people mad, it's the best defense I've seen in the state. If there's a defense better than Phoebus's in Virginia, and I put this on my hats hits on X or Twitter, whatever you call it now. I think it's used to be Twitter. It's now X.
Twitter to
I need to see it. Yeah, it's Twitter to me as well. I need to see it if there's a better defense. They brought back 7 or 8 starters from a rock-solid, incredible defense last year. Anthony Reddick will take your head off going to Maryland. He's a mean, ferocious defender. Tayshawn Stevenson committed to Old Dominion on the other side of the edge. He's not fun to get hit by either. They have a bunch of other guys that will hit you hard. Caleb Tillery, Noah Jefferson. List goes on and on. Deshaun Richardson. And they play with a swagger and an aggressiveness and a speed that's just unseen right now at the high school level. Didn't they have the
player of the year in the state last year on defense?
They did. Jordan Bass, who's now at Pittsburgh. Yeah. So they lose him, and their defense is still as nasty as ever. Now, I say all that to tell you, they hold Oscar Smith at 99 yards. They have 10 different guys. You start 11. You had 10 guys make a tackle for loss. You get 3 takeaways, 2 by Keontae Gray at defensive back. Shout out to him. The offense only generated 137 yards. The passing game was 2 of 12 for 28 yards with 2 different quarterbacks. And they had a few turnovers in this game. Oscar Smith did have 16 penalties for 157 yards. So it's not like Phoebus lit the world on fire offensively. So what I'm getting at is Phoebus's offense has to show some improvement and growth by November, by December, in order to beat a Dinwiddie, to beat a King George, who has 2 of the state's best receivers, maybe the best receiving tandem out there with Makai White and Chance Wiggins, who are committed to Maryland and Virginia Tech, respectively. White to the Terps, Wiggins to the Hokies. And remember, King George played that classic barn burner with Dinwiddie last year in the playoffs. That was one of the games of the year. Verina's in 4B, and we saw what they just did to Freedom, took them to the wire. So Region 4B is a harder region to get out of, but those teams are going to maybe be more battle-tested than Phoebus because this is not the Peninsula District of the 1990s where you had Allen Iverson at Bethel and Ronald Curry at Hampton. Outside of Warwick, who will be the final game, or second to final game for Phoebus regular season in late October, I don't know who's going to push Phoebus and really pull it out of them. So I would wonder about complacency, getting bored because Phoebus is going to win these games like 56-6 and 62-0 and 83-6, similar to what Laura Botetourt did to Blacksburg last week. And then you have to step up your game because if Dinwiddie or Verina or King George, more so Dinwiddie and King George from the offensive explosiveness standpoint and potency, if you run into that team in December and they get an early 21-7 lead on you, 14-0, I want to see if the Phoebus offense has what it takes to come back. Now, I think the Phoebus defense can hold anybody, even those great offenses, those high-octane attacks down. But they don't want to get behind because right now their offense at this point, and I think it will get better as we move along, has to show some growth. And out west, EC Glass is very good. New coach in Jamar Lovelace won their first game, lost their second to Patrick Kenny Roanoke, which was not an alarming situation. And Salem, who lost its first game to Liberty Christian, another private school, by the way, that had won a well of a ball game to open the season. They still have Peyton Lewis going to Tennessee. They still have Chris Cole, one of the best linebackers in the entire country.
Liberty Christian's 4 now?
Okay. No, Liberty Christian's 3. Sure. Salem lost to them, so Salem's in 4D. I feel like Salem is still going to be the team to beat out west, and they'll probably get to the state championship as long as their offensive line gels as we get closer to playoff time. I feel like they're still going to be the team to beat, with some other teams lurking in the background, such as an EC Glass, and even take a look at Tuscarora in 4C, where Tommy Peed is putting up some nice numbers at quarterback behind that massive O-line headed up by Fletcher Westfall, the big 6'8" tackle going to Florida. So there's some teams there that could be threats, but I think it comes down to sort of your usual suspects. Phoebus now in Class 4 after winning the last 2 Class 3 titles. You got Dinwiddie, you got King George, you got Verina, and I would look at Salem really hard to probably get to the state final out of the western side there, and that's 4C, 4D at Liberty University come December.
How's the Dinwiddie quarterback coming along? He last year he had an incredible year. His first year playing quarterback. Is he continuing to develop?
Yeah, he's humming well. Harry Dalton was the state player of the year. They lost that first game to Glenville out of Ohio, 36-13, but they really dismantled GW Danville this past week. And we actually had GW Danville in our Class 4 top 10 to begin the season. They beat them 52-7, and then they turn around and won. It's hard to believe they already played 3 games now, Julian. Think about it. 30% of their regular season is done for Dinwiddie. And we're on Labor Day weekend here. What are we talking about? They dismantled North Stafford 58-8. So with him at the controls, they can run it, they can throw it, and they play with tempo, great tempo. I think their defense is solid, not spectacular at the level of Phoebus's, but Savon McDowell, linebacker going to Coastal Carolina. He's one of the surest hitters around. Really athletic kid. I think he's a steal for the Chanticleers of Coastal Carolina. And who doesn't like going on to Myrtle Beach to play college football? I'm sure he will. So they're going to be tough. And that Central District, playing in the same district with Thomas Dale and Hopewell, it'll have them hardened come playoff time.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about out west, and you mentioned EC Glass, and you mentioned Liberty Christian, but you didn't mention Heritage. Heritage got to the final last year in Class 3 against Phoebus. So who's the team to beat in Class 3 this year?
Well, I still think you would pay attention to Heritage of Lynchburg. Brad Bradley lost a lot. He kind of plays the coy. We got a lot to get work cut out for us, that type of thing. You have a number of teams that could certainly take that mantle. Heritage of Lynchburg, breaking a new starting quarterback, new running backs, but they still have a lot of skill on their team from last year that helped them get to the state final. And in that Seminole district, you get out of that with Brookville and with Rustburg, who's now emerging, Liberty Christian with that monster running back and Gideon Davidson, who's going to Clemson. You're battle tested for sure. I think the Seminole district might be, and I could offend some people with this, but I don't really care. I think it's probably as good a district as there's in state. At least those top 3, 4, 5 teams, they get you ready for the postseason and the rigors that it takes for it. And Tavian Clark for them is a really sure-handed receiver. Had a big year a season ago. I think 63 catches for close to 1,000 yards. And so they have a playmaker and they have some pieces there. I don't know that they're quite at the level of a couple of teams that I would say are the favorites. In the eastern side, Lake Taylor, who just beat Camden of New Jersey. Hank Sawyer, we continue to send our best to him. He just lost his mother. recently passed away. Also, one of his best friends, who was a longtime assistant coach, and Theo Ford. But he's got a monster receiver who's 6'7", 6'8", and Elijah Moss Washington, who was the Eastern District Basketball Player of the Year. And he could certainly be up for state player of the year in football in Class 3. He's committed to Syracuse, plays wide receiver, tight end for him, plays defense. And a lot of Lake Taylor's guys, best guys, go both ways. So depth is a question mark for them. Depth also a question mark for Lord Botetourt, who lost its first game 14-7 to EC Glass, but they have some hulking offensive linemen that are real difference makers. Kendall Howard, who's a Wake Forest commit, Keshawn Anderson, DJ Tolliver. And then they turn around from that 14-7 loss and laid 83 on the board against Blacksburg, 83 points. And Jakari Nicely is a dual threat quarterback. Both Botetourt and Lake Taylor have dual threat quarterbacks. Jameer Sporty Freeman for Lake Taylor, and Lake Taylor's going to play aggressive. They're going to bring the kitchen sink at you defensively. The team I've labeled the favorite to win Class 3, though, believe it or not, is Magna Vista. And they lost in the first round of the playoffs last year to Stanton River. But Joe Favero, who's won a couple of state championships before, he brought back about 18 starters or players that got starts last year, including his starting quarterback in Simeon Moore, who's a sophomore, 1,500-yard rusher in J.J. Spriggs. And their first couple of games here, Magna Vista has been as good as advertised, Julian, 53-6 over Dan River, and they avenged that loss to Stanton River 41-6. So they're a team to watch out for, because I think athletically on the outside, on the perimeter, on the edges, they have the speed to match some of those teams. And in Region 3D, where people are talking about Christiansburg, who won that region last year, and Lord Botetourt, it could be Magna Vista that comes out of there. So I took the if you were looking at the blackjack table, I took the rush or the roulette. I took the long shot. People wouldn't have Magna Vista as the favorite, but I took them to go into the season to win it. And I still feel pretty good about that, because they were probably not on the tip of tongues like people that thought, all right, it's going to be Lake Taylor or Hopewell or Lafayette or Heritage Lynchburg, Liberty Christian, Botetourt. You would have probably gone to 6, 7, 8 teams on the board. So they're kind of like the long shot in college football, like the Washington Huskies. That's my pick there with Magna Vista right now.
Yeah. One of the most underrated areas of the state in terms of producing athletes over the last 50 years, the Martinsville, Danville area. Just so many great football and basketball players. Let's go to Appalachia and Class 2. Is Graham a powerhouse again? Last year they beat Central in the final.
Yeah, they are. They brought back their state player of the year running back, who's just tremendous, in Tydress Clements. They won a neighboring border rivalry game with Bluefield. They play every year to start the year, and that's a place that it gets raucous, whether it's at Graham or it's at Bluefield for that one. And they got the job done in a low-scoring affair, which I think was a really encouraging sign for their defense that brought back about 8 or 9 starters led by Omari Hill, Sean Hughes, Jamel Floyd. But Clements at running back is a difference maker. I think their new quarterback in Dalton Roberts is very serviceable and starting to get the hang of things for them. And then they have an offensive line that I feel like can push people around and give Clements that room to run. So they're the team to beat, I think, pretty sizably, even with Riverheads, who won 7 straight state championships in Class 1, moving up to Class 2. Riverheads' region is going to be really hard to get out of, because you have Clark County, who just dusted off King William this past week. You have Stewart's Draft. You have a lot of teams in that Region 2B that will be Central Woodstock, who got to the state championship last year and lost to Graham. You have a lot of teams that could be in contention there. And then watch out for Poquoson on the eastern side of the state. Elliott Duty's got more depth than he's had in a lot of years. Eli Tyndall's a really slick quarterback for them. They have multiple backs that can get the job done. They'll have some tough games in the Bay Rivers that could certainly result in L's for them, because they play Lafayette and they play War Hill, who's off to a nice start. And then on the western side, watch out for Radford, because they have maybe the best quarterback in the state at the lower levels in Landon Clark, who just this past week had over 300 yards of offense, 3 or 4 touchdowns as Radford just blitzed the competition. They beat George Witt the first week 42-7, and they really took care of business in a dominating way, 35-0 over Giles. So I'd watch out for Radford and Poquoson as some dark horses that could certainly be at the end. But your hands down favorite is definitely Graham.
Okay. Well, let's go to Class 1. You mentioned George Witt. I guess they just took a big loss to who did you say they lost to?
Radford.
Yeah. Well, they were in the final last year against Riverheads. So it sounds like Class 1 is probably wide open.
It is the team that I've circled as the favorite, though it's not a definite team to beat, because if you gave me a team or the field, I'm taking the field, whereas in Class 2, I'm taking Graham. Class 3, I might take the field, although I like Magna Vista a lot. Class 4, I'm probably taking Phoebus or Dinwiddie, although you could take the field. Class 5, I'm taking Maury. Class 6, if you give me Freedom or Highland Springs, I'm taking them. The field, though, might be a safer, because I'm not sure which one of those two I love. It's 1A, 1B for me, really, but in Class 6. But in Class 1, I think you take the field, although Honaker, they have some really, really dynamic players. I mean, a player that had 8 touchdowns in a game last year, Aiden Lowe, quarterback in Peyton Music, Parker Bandy at receiver, a lot of all-region, all-state level guys, and I think this is their breakout year. And a couple games in the book so far, Honaker's been really, really impressive. In fact, they won their first game by a wide margin. They ended up, I think, scored 50, 60 points. So against Lebanon, I like them a lot. I think they're going to be the favorite. However, Narrows has got one of the best multi-sport athletes in the state in Collier Pruitt, a very athletic kid that I think not a lot of people know about that need to, including some colleges. You look at Essex, who graduated a ton, but they have a winning culture and tradition. They're interesting because they beat Sussex Central in their first game, Julian. They had no offensive starters back, only 3 defensive starters. They moved at quarterback their starting center and Zay Bundy to quarterback, and they won. It's unheard of. So Class 1, the small schools, you get some weird results. I put Westmoreland in my top 10 because the first week of the season, they used to be Washington and Lee, by the way. They won 38-16 over West Point, 2 teams who were just outside my top 10. And Jordan Tolson had a wonderful game, 4 or 5 touchdowns, 250 plus yards passing. They turned around and played a Class 4 school in Eastern View. Now that's stepping up in competition, Class 4, and they lost the game 76-6. So you go, man, that's just that. So they're Class 1. It takes a little bit longer time to get a read on them. I think Northumberland's could be a contender there. And then you have some teams like Rye Cove, Patrick Henry, Glade Spring. But this feels like it's the wide open class where there's just going to be all kinds of up and down changes, shifting, because I feel like at Class 1, it's kind of even out. Unless you have that 1 or 2 superstar dynamic player, it's hard to. Now, Riverheads has had that with Caden Cook Cash. And we've seen a couple years ago in Class 2, King William had that in Damon Claiborne, who scored 60 touchdowns thereabout and is at Wake Forest. Unless you have those 1 or 2 guys that can just take over a game, I think you get a lot of seesaw games come playoff time, which could make for some more compelling close games in the early rounds for Class 1. But I don't know that there's some teams that have really – another team to watch out for. They just won a close one with Carroll County, who's a Class 3 school. But in Class 1, watch out for Grayson County. They won 12-7, but if they can win different ways, which is high scoring or low scoring with their defense, I think they could be a factor in that thing too. We got the number 2 in the state Class 1. So you're going to see a lot of different teams pop up there, and I think – there could be a sleeper that emerges come playoff time that may even have a chance to win it, whether they win the whole thing or win a region title that might not be talked about right now here in early September.
Yeah. Well, this is great, Matthew. I really appreciate that. I'm glad we waited a few weeks to do this because I think we got a better read on what's going on. Saw some great out-of-state, intrastate matchups that really kind of give us a heads up on what's going to happen this year. I did want to ask you whether or not there's been any changes to the postseason structure. Now, I've heard rumblings. I know for at least for Class 6, I'm sure it may apply to some of the other classes. I know that the regional final was between the 2 Northern Virginia, the former Northern regions, the 6C and 6D. So we were pretty much guaranteed a finalist from the old Fairfax County, Arlington, Alexandria. Someone says they are changing the structure, but I don't know for a fact. Have you heard anything about that?
As far as I know, they have not changed that. I would check the VHSL website and encourage people to go to vhsl.org and continue to look at the football tab if there are any changes. I went up there not too long ago and did notice one change, which is that the Class 6 and Class 5 state championships are going to be played at UVA's Scott Stadium in Charlottesville.
That's great.
Which it used to be at. Last time it was there, I think it was 2010 or 11. I remember going back there in 2008 when Oscar Smith beat Osborne and Phoebus beat Dinwiddie. In fact, when it was AAA Group 6, Group 5, Division 5, Group AAA, Division 6, Division 5, I should say. But as far as I know, it's still A versus B, C versus D for the state semis. I voiced my opinion that I don't love that. I understand to a degree why they do it, but I want the 2 best teams in the state final regardless. I don't care if you're A, B, C, D, LMNOP. To me, QRS, TUV, I don't care where you're from or who you are. I think when you get to the Final 4, we should then seed them based off your power rating or your record. There should be some formula. And this should apply to basketball, too, for the state quarterfinals. Seed them there because that'll give you your true measure. At that point, you're traveling anyways. So what's the harm? Because in 6, I think the obvious elephant in the room is you're going to potentially have Freedom and Highland Springs play in the state semis.
Yeah.
And those might be the 2 best teams, and they can't play in the state championship. And it applies to other classifications because you might have a case where you have 2 14-0 teams square off in the state semis, In another state semifinal, you might have a 2 and a 3-loss team play each other. Well, why don't you have the 14-0 play the 2-loss team and the 14-0 play the 3-loss team? I don't care if you're in 6 or 1. I don't care if you're from Nova, Richmond, Tidewater, Roanoke. I don't care where you're from. That to me is the most equitable, fairest way to do things. And I don't understand why we can't get sensible people in a room to come to that conclusion, because I can see it that way. And I think you can see it that way. And a lot of fans can see it that way. But you get some bullheaded people that sometimes want to have it their way. And it's not about what you want, it's what's best for the kids and the fans and the sport.
Yeah. Well, I think Hampton won the last AAA championship at UVA when I was a student there. I remember we all went and watched that game. Great memories. I think one thing that's lost. You're right about the equity of the situation when you have the top teams playing in the semifinals. But what you also lose is memories. There are lifetime memories with traveling for a state semifinal. When you get on a bus and you have to go somewhere, so it costs a little bit more. When South Lakes plays Hayfield in the state semifinals, you don't build memories. I mean, it is great. It is a state semifinal, but that's not what the state tournament is all about. It's playing different parts of the state. It's getting your best teams and covering the whole state and seeing who's best. And that is lost. And I know it's equitable is one thing, but also it's about memories. And I hope they will do something. One thing I like about what the coaches are doing is in basketball and in football, they are putting together the toughest schedule that they can find. They're going out of state. They're playing tough teams in state in different classifications, because we can no longer rely upon our state playoffs to determine who's best. Last year we had 4 teams, and even probably Graham had an argument to be one of the best teams. Who knows who's really the best? That those things should be kind of decided on the field. And it seems like guys like me and you end up arguing about who's best, whether or not instead of being able to just watch and determine who's best. But anyway, I'm going to give you the last word on that, Matthew.
Well, and to your point, I think you made a great one about the word memories. When you go play out-of-state teams and you go play schools that you ordinarily wouldn't play, those players remember that, and those coaches remember that, and those fans remember that. And the reason they remember that, and you know that they do, and I'm not just saying it and you're not just spewing it, is because all you gotta do is get on social media and get on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and see them all arguing about and showing about, hey, do you remember when we played this? And you see clips of old games shown of when that took place. So that's the proof right there in the pudding. And I think there will be some changes addressed. I think the Virginia High School League does a fine job of, when there are issues presented to them, at least having their committees and folks look at that. So I think that's coming. It's just a matter of when those changes that we need to have made get implemented, and when people get in a room and they can come to agreement on, let's do what needs to be done here. And I think that for football, basketball, and all sports, you want the true best teams at the end of the year. It doesn't matter what part of the state you're from, and having each part of the state represented in the final or whatever, because the VHSL's message has always been, they leave it up to the regions to decide a lot of things, as far as you send us, to get your champions here. So I think that is coming. That day is coming. It's just not here yet. Just like, in another sport, people have been screaming from the high heavens about a shot clock. That day is coming. But it's not as simple as let's snap our finger and give us a shot clock. There's a lot that goes into it. You got to have its costs. You got, people have to be a little patient with it. So it doesn't just say, oh yeah, we need a shot clock. Make it happen right now. And the one that kills me on the shot clock thing, not to get on a rant here, is we have to have it for our kids at the next level. Well, guess what, folks? Not all 5 kids for your team and the other team are going to play college basketball. So if that's your reason for making it, that's the wrong reason. If you show me data and analytics and proof that shooting percentages in the game's better or the flow's better, I'm all for it. But stop with we have to get our kids, because college basketball doesn't make its changes just for the NBA's sake. We shouldn't make our changes for high school just for college basketball's sake, because 90% or more of those kids are not playing college basketball. Now, there you have some stacked teams that do. Your kids that are at Paul VI or this school, that school, you're going to find your D1 guys all over the place. But let's not make the change for the sake of that. There you go. That's my soapbox for today.
Yeah, I hope that the VHSL has a competition committee. They have guys like you on there who are looking out for the interests of fans of the game and the history of the game, which to me, that's what it's all about. I don't have kids playing anymore. I'm into the history and the memories. But anyway, Matthew, this has been great. I appreciate you always taking the time to talk football and basketball with me. And I'm sure we'll get together around Thanksgiving and we'll preview the postseason.
For sure. Always a pleasure, Julian. Really appreciate it. All the best to you. And thank you for what you do serving the the high school athletes and the coaches and the teams and players and the fans out there, and enjoy your September and October as we roll it into November. It'll be here before you know it.
Yeah, you too. And don't forget, Matt Hatfield, VirginiaPreps.com. Also, YouTube. Let me get your YouTube channel right. Virginia Beach Sportsplex YouTube channel. I'm sure you'll be on a podcast network soon, but find them on YouTube. Support these guys. They do a great job. But anyway, Matthew, I really appreciate you taking the time, buddy.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.
All right, man. Take care.